Hello and welcome. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50. Welcome to this series of 4 webinars celebrating the skills-powered organization. In this opening webinar, we will be looking at the data you need to make skills the currency of work. And then you can join us for September the 18th, when we'll have another great session on how organizations can reshape how they manage talent and skills to be prepared for an uncertain future. And then for the third in the series of webinars, on October the 2nd, we'll be looking at the great redesign of work. And finally, on 16th of October, we'll have Ravin Jesuthasan and Tanuj Kapilashrami crystallizing the key messages from their book, The Skills-Powered Organization, The Journey to the Next Generation Enterprise, which is published by MIT Press on October the 1st. So there's a lot to look forward to and some great conversations in store. Setting the pace today, we're joined by Ravin Jesuthasan, who is the co-author of the Skills-Powered Organization, as well as being the global leader for work and skills at Mercer. Ravin is joined by Peter Stevenson, who is the go-to-market leader of the Skills Edge products at Mercer. And giving practical insights on the discussion of the data requirements for making skills the currency of work, we are joined by Britt Alcala, who is a specialist in enterprise talent and skills at Delta Airlines. So a big welcome to Ravin, Peter and Britt, and also to everyone joining us from around the world. Please let us know where you're joining from today and send in your comments, thoughts and questions at any time during the session. We want to make these sessions as informative and interactive as possible, so make time for your input. We've got a full hour. So let's kick things off with Ravin. And the key question behind this series, why are skills so important now?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. It's lovely to be here with you. Hoping my audio is coming through okay. So I think, Sam Altman said it really well, Stuart, in Davos this year, in a session that he co-led. He said that as a species, we have never seen the velocity and volatility of change hit the levels that we've seen over the last 3 years. And IMF data certainly bears it out. The IMF estimates that the level of uncertainty in the global economy has increased by 2.5 times. That's not 2.5%, but 2.5 times over the last 4 years relative to the previous 30, which is really saying something. And, as you look at this velocity and volatility of change, what it's demanding is a much greater level of agility and flexibility on the part of organizations, much greater level of resilience as it relates to how they respond to changing demand profiles and the supply of skills and capabilities, and the ability to essentially have a much smaller set of building blocks to be able to respond to these changes. And that's where skills come in, because if you think of that basic currency of work, Stuart, that we've known for the last 140 years, largely the job. And I'm not saying the job is going away anytime soon, but I think the need for a much more granular level of insight into the demand for capability as the world changes, and a much better picture of the supply of those capabilities from the workforce. And that's really, I think, what's at the heart of this demand for skills, the need for smaller building blocks that can be deployed and redeployed at scale and at speed with much greater agility than the traditional, quote unquote, high frictional cost model of just merely relying on traditional jobs and the headlines that they represent.
So an easy way of understanding what I think skills is one of those things we all know what they are,
Right.
But the way you kind of describe them, Ravin, is kind of as the building blocks of what work entails.
Yes. Oh, exactly. And I think what the benefits, Stuart, of those smaller building blocks is we get to a much more comprehensive picture of what's actually being demanded by changing business models and what's actually being represented by the talent in our organizations. Because when we get to skills, we see the unique bundle of both technical and transferable skills. That's Peter versus Britt versus you versus me. We don't limit ourselves to the headlines of, well, Britt does X at Delta Airlines, so she can only do X because that's in her job description. Or Peter is responsible for the skills edge suite, and that's the only thing he can do. Versus if I can have insight into all of the skills that Peter might have, that come from his experiences having done a bunch of other things, that come from the way he works within the organization, the way he collaborates with clients, etc. I get a much, much better view of his full potential. And then equally, I think from a demand perspective, as work changes, understanding exactly what's being demanded and who might be able to actually perform that, be that human or machine increasingly.
So it's a reinterpretation of what a job actually is and its role in delivering agility and the agility and resilience you talk about there, then, Ravin.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you'll hear from Britt, Stuart, sorry, look, my screen is moving around. As you hear from Britt, I think the work that Delta Airlines has done of saying, yeah, the job is still the currency, but we're going to have these smaller building blocks of skills, ensure a much more informed job architecture that makes it that much more effective at deploying and developing talent as the demand for those skills changes. And I think that's the sort of interesting thing as we look at how this space is changing. And Stuart, as you know, we've had this conversation for several years now. The demand for this is absolutely off the charts, right? The number of organizations implementing technologies, implementing architectures and strategies that are making skills the currency for work to ensure that work itself is more accessible, as well as, the workforce itself that much more agile in meeting these changing needs has just grown exponentially.
And this has been accelerated by the pandemic?
I think the pandemic was just the tipping point. I think that, the pandemic certainly brought into question the where and when of work and how skills could be deployed beyond just being in the same place at the same time. I think that has been accelerated even more, Stuart, by the climate crisis, because that has caused skill premiums to shift across the board, both in organizations affected directly by it, as well as organizations who have maybe a more secondary or tertiary sort of impact. Certainly the big pivot and that I've seen the last 24 months has been the impact of generative AI and how rapidly it is shifting skill premiums across both white collar work, but increasingly as we find Gen AI starting to accelerate robotics, how that's finding its way more and more into some of the blue collar work as well.
Talk a bit more, Ravin, because you talk about agility and resilience. And when I hear them paired together, I always think they push in different directions in organizations. We assume that a resilient organization is probably not that agile. And we assume that an agile organization is not that resilient. So can you explain how it works with skills?
Absolutely. And I actually see the two as sort of being prerequisites of each other, actually, as I suspect you do as well, Stuart, because if you think of an organization that's really built to last, it also needs to be built to change. And the way we think about skills is it's addressing both, and this ties into this narrative around agility and resilience, because what we're being asked to do is bend the demand curve of work and the supply curves of work in a fundamentally different way. And when I talk about bending the demand curve of work, what that means is, thinking about how do we redesign work so that we're enabling talent to flow to it as seamlessly as possible as it changes, while ensuring that talent has the means and space to keep reinventing itself in an era where we're increasingly going to be asked to decouple growth from resource intensity. So to me, that really results in a more agile sort of construct, but also a more resilient one in the face of rapidly changing demand, ensuring that we've got an operating model that is sustainable under multiple different scenarios. So that's the redesign of work. If that's the bend the demand curve phase, the bend the supply curve is about ensuring work that is much more accessible to a lot more people. Re-envisioning that colleague experience. So we're meeting more and more people on their individual terms, ensuring an ever more equitable, inclusive, and accountable culture. And I think both of those things, address the push and pull, if you will, Stuart, of both agility and resilience.
Thank you to everyone joining us. We've got people from the UK, the US, Qatar, UAE, Trinidad, and we're big in the Caribbean as well, Trinidad and Barbados. Really nice to see everyone joining us. Please send over your questions at any time during the session. Ravin, thank you. Where does this leave data then? What's the interaction with data in all this?
Yeah, I think that's why we wanted to start with this conversation, Stuart, right? Because data is not just foundational, but as you'll hear from Peter and Britt, the demands of data are changing really quickly when we think about these smaller building blocks of work, skills, as opposed to just the headline of a job. When Tanuj and I were writing the Skills Powered Organization, we defined 3 core capabilities of that Skills Powered Organization. The first was the ability to understand the demand signals of changing work. How is the external economy changing? How were our technology decisions evolving? How were threats from our competitors manifesting in terms of our demand profile? And what does that mean in terms of the skills being demanded? So data about the changing demand and translating that changing demand into very specific skill requirements. Equally understanding the supply of those skills within the organization and the gaps that needed to be closed through the optimal design of work. So do we close those gaps with hiring more talent, developing people, deploying them differently through more agile pools? Do we close those gaps with more AI and automation? Do we close those gaps with external providers like gig workers or outsourcers, etc.? What is the strategy for the design of work itself to optimize the demand and supply? So data on all of that, what we were calling work design. The second key capability was around development. And do we have the insights into how to close those skill gaps that we've identified at scale and speed? Do we understand that? Do we have the data on the optimal means for closing those gaps? An internship, an apprenticeship, the use of VR and AR over the course of work being performed, so we're continuously collapsing the learn-do cycle, traditional learning resources, you name it. And again, I think what's really important, Stuart, is that it's not, sort of your grandfather or your grandmother's development, right? Where we did it when times were good. We did it when we had a few dollars to spare. We did it when people had some time on the weekends. I think we're increasingly seeing organizations be really intentional about development, both in terms of building it into their strategic plans, so it's a part of the operating strategy, and then secondly, by ensuring that there is space for learning in the flow of work, because we can't expect people to reskill and upskill at the quantum and pace that is being asked for on their own time, when the kids are in bed between, on a Saturday evening or when they're at a soccer game on a Sunday afternoon. So that being intentional in the design of learning into the flow of work, I think, is really important. And to the point about strategy, I think, Stuart, when Tanuj, you and I talked the last time, we talked about some of the work that she's done to show the board at Standard Chartered that they can actually save £50,000 per employee by upskilling and reskilling talent from their sunset roles to their sunrise roles, as opposed to doing the old churn and burn that companies have done for eons. And I think that starts to make development a core part of the operating model. And then the third part of this is the deployment of skills back to work. So we're not doing development for the sake of development, but are we deploying those skills back to where they're needed at scale and speed with efficiency, effectiveness, and impact? So a bit of a long-winded way, Stuart, of when we talk about the data requirements, I think the data has to address all 3 of those core capabilities And it's also why I think AI is so pivotal to meeting some of those data requirements, as you're going to hear from Peter and Britt as we talk about the more practical applications.
Well, let's bring you in now, Peter. How would you characterize the general level of maturity in the market for the ideas that Ravin's been discussing, the appetite for this new form of data?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Stuart. So, I mean, I've been focused on skills for a number of years now, and I've had a lot of conversations during that period with clients. And I'd say that each company tends to be at a different place on its skills journey, has a different level of maturity around skills. And Ravin's been describing some processes that would apply to companies that are quite a long way down that road. And it may be due to the part of the business that I work within, but I would say a lot of the companies that I speak to are probably fairly early on in their skills journey, right? They're trying to figure out how to get started. Often they're going to be at the initial stage of creating a skills taxonomy, identifying use cases for becoming skills powered. So, across the market as a whole, I would say that the level of maturity is currently quite modest. But I would also say that companies are developing their approaches fast. Okay, and of course there are some companies who've been on this journey for some time and consequently are already well ahead of the curve. So it's a broad spectrum. But I would say that the market in general is at a relatively early stage on the skills journey, although we're definitely seeing increased adoption and momentum.
So I suppose that begs the question, Peter, why? Why are they early in this journey? Because the notion of skills isn't a new one.
No, you're completely correct, and I think a lot of it comes down to some of the things that Ravin was mentioning earlier, not least of which is technology, right? So obviously the concept of skills has been around for quite some time, but up until the last few years, we haven't had the kinds of technological support. And I'm not going to start with AI. I'm going to start with things like HRIS, right? Skills that will support skills. If you want to bring AI in, AI scraping of online job profiles that allow companies who have access to this data to develop market-derived skills taxonomies, right? So I think, and talent marketplaces as well are a big part of this general trend. So I think that technology has a big impact upon that, and why skills is compared to, for example, competencies, a relatively new approach.
Peter, why are companies so reticent to get started?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Stuart. So I think I mentioned in the offset that I run some research that we do, part of which is our skills snapshot survey, which is an annual piece of research into skills practices in the marketplace. And when we look at that question or a similar question in the survey, the top 3 obstacles to becoming skills powered were in descending order. So we have lack of HR capacity or capability. That's at 40% of respondents. We have too much change, which is 38%, and we have lack of funding at 30%. So, when you think about those 3, it seems to me that HR capability and a broad kind of reluctance to change are the driving forces here, as opposed to, the financial aspects. And I think generally though, the journey to becoming skills powered, it can seem overwhelming for organizations. Many companies are just hesitant to start. They just simply don't know where to start in some cases. And if that sounds like you or your company, my recommendation would be to start small, with a pilot, figure out why you're doing what you want to do and what success would look like, and go from there. And assuming you achieve the success you're hoping for, you can then roll that out to larger groups or other groups within the organization. And as I think I said before earlier on, from my perspective, implementing a robust and validated skills taxonomy is really foundational if you want to do anything with skills.
So how common is it to pay for skills today?
Yeah, also a great question. I would say that when we within the skills product team began our journey to create skills tools, which was well over 5 years ago, at that time we felt that pay for skills was likely just around the corner. Actually, there was a lot of interest in it, as a topic amongst our clients. But what we found as time's moved on is that when it comes to specifically pay for skills, and I'm not talking about broader skills powered approaches, pay for skills, the market has moved less quickly than we anticipated. And I think that reflects the fact that a lot of companies are actually still at earlier stages in terms of establishing a foundational skills taxonomy that's linked to a job architecture, right? So again, referring to the skills snapshot survey, one of the questions we asked is, does your company have any form of skills-based rewards programs? And about 3/4 of respondents said this year that they do not have a skills-based reward program in place, meaning that only about 1/4 of our respondents are doing something in this space today. And also bear in mind that in my experience, there are kind of relatively few companies that have implemented a skills-based reward program across the whole organization. It's much more common to focus on little pockets where the need exists. For example, digital functions or data science or AI, or roles that require people with AI skills. For these areas of the business where there's a lot of tightness in the market around talent, pay is an obvious and a powerful lever that people HR can pull on to help address and fill those gaps from the external market. And I suspect that as time moves on and more companies get taxonomies in place and start to really experience the success across their skills-based use cases, we're going to see the practice of pay for skills become more common and more formalized. Although whether or not it will really replace job-based pay, even in the medium term, I'm kind of relatively skeptical. I think it's going to be a supplementary practice that companies increasingly build in to more traditional approaches to rewards.
Eldon Blackman's got a comment. Just for my clarification, are we referring to hard skills, soft skills, or both? Ravin?
Yeah, I can take that one, Stuart. Eldon, we're referring to both of them. In the skills powered organization, we think about skills broadly as technical, what have traditionally been called hard skills. And we also think about, what have been called soft skills in some organizations, somewhat pejoratively, as more of those transferable and enabling skills, which, as we've seen more and more AI come in, many organizations seeing a growing premium on those transferable skills. Because the ability, I'll go back to my example of Standard Chartered Bank reskilling talent from their sunset to their sunrise jobs, it places a much higher premium on the transferable skills. Because the ability to teach technical skills is something that we can increasingly do much more efficiently. Teaching the transferable skills often is what takes a lot longer and and often can be far more challenging. But short answer is that it includes both.
Thanks for the question, Eldon. Thank you, Ravin. Let's come to Britt. Britt's been sitting there patiently in the executive lounge waiting for the flight to take off. Britt is a specialist in enterprise talent and skills at Delta Airlines. So, Britt, how do the talk of skills, how does it resonate with with Delta Airlines, and what have you been doing in response?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Britt Alcala. It's nice to be here today to talk about Delta's journey. And in response to that, Stuart, as part of Delta's broader skills first strategy, Skills Foundation will be impacting 3 major HR processes. The first being skills-based job sourcing. So employees will have visibility into the critical skills that are needed across Delta's job architecture. So whether that's within their current subfamily or if they want to move into another area at Delta, they can see those essential skills and be a competitive candidate in the future. The next element is skills-based development. So as Ravin mentioned earlier, that linkage of learning to skills will provide a more targeted development experience for employees to be able to upskill and close any gaps that they have. And lastly is skills-based hiring. So this is that connection point to our talent acquisition, which will allow us to identify internal talent through skills, which we previously don't have.
So you've kind of turned everything is kind of skills oriented.
Yes, it's, as previously mentioned, it has truly become a common currency for us in HR, and it is really going to be the focus of a lot of our work streams, which is wonderful.
And what stage are you at then with this, Britt?
So we are at the point where we have completed validation, and I'm happy to walk us through what our process was, because we did get to partner with Mercer through this over the last year. And so our process really started back in 2019 when compensation at Delta created Delta's job architecture. And so for Skills Foundation, we are then taking that one step further and applying skills to the previously established job architecture. And so back in 2023, we got to partner with Mercer Atlanta and basically had 4 major phases for our project plan. First being Mercer mapping our Delta job and subfamilies to their Mercer Skills Library, which Mercer Skills Library is skills that are aligned with the global market data, which is really important for us at Delta, just to have industry best practice as our starting point for skills. And then secondly, internally, we aligned on what our strategy and project plan would be. So for us, that resulted in being 5 to 10 skills per subfamily was our goal. And then we discussed what type of skills we would validate for our respective areas, such as merit versus scale populations. And then we did an internal initial review with our HR business partners and our talent acquisition to do an initial gut check on those Mercer Skills Library cuts for each subfamily. But phase 3 was our validation stage. So this is where we had the opportunity to really engage with 500 subject matter experts across Delta to validate the skills, provide definition feedback, and apply proficiencies to their respective subfamilies. And we partnered with the business to make sure that we had the appropriate subject matter experts who had enough tenure and experience to accurately speak to their respective subfamily. And then our personal team of the skills team at Delta did a quality control to conduct a holistic review of the skills taxonomy. So whether that is updating skills definitions or consolidating skills as applicable. And then the last phase was finalizing the skills. So once we completed the subfamily validation for each group, we would take that output and put it into an executive summary, which ultimately was shared with business leaders for their review and finalization. So really high level process of what we did over the last year. It's a lot of work and hard work we got to do in partnership with Mercer, but those were the key steps of our process, and we found it to be really successful into getting the skills validated for us.
And this is across Delta as a whole company?
Yes. So both our merit and scale populations.
Okay, and how many people work for Delta?
100,000.
Yeah, so it's a big deal. The Barb Archer says, how long is it taking Delta to get the job architecture in place and get the skills aligned? I suppose
Sure.
another question from that, Britt, is how difficult has it been? What are the obstacles in the way? Have you had a big job convincing people? How open are people to these?
So layered answer, but first step into all of this is the job architecture. So I can't speak for Delta compensation, but that is definitely the first step that is needed to get to the skills foundation process. But Delta is a large company, so any company-wide initiatives can be met with hesitation, but we were really encouraged by the excitement across our leaders as they understood the positive impact this could have for employees at Delta. But a few things to know before getting started is just the timing associated. As much as you can project plan, as like I said previously, it was 2023. into early 2024 was really the time that we validated skills. And as much as you can project plan and be organized, you're ultimately dependent on the business capacity to support and participate in this project. So just remembering to stay agile and adjusting as needed to just make sure that the validation process is done right will create more accurate results, as ultimately this is a long-term investment, and taking the time to do it right is really important.
You say it's a long-term investment, Britt. What kind of timescales are you working to?
Yeah, so we are preparing for a talent hub launch of next year. And just high level, this will be an opportunity where employees can have visibility to their skills across all of Delta subfamilies, and have that connection point to the learning and development tied to skills. So it will be a great opportunity for employees, but it's coming down the road. But all this great hard work that we have been doing and partnering with our key HR stakeholders will be a part of the broader talent hub, is what we're calling it.
Okay, well, it's a good name as anything. And Nicolene Hogg has a very precise question. What tech platform are you using?
Our current HRSD system is SAP, so that's the system we're utilizing.
Okay, and tell us more about the Talent Hub. That seems to be the core of what you're trying to create, isn't it?
Yes. We are just one element of the Talent Hub, so I don't want to necessarily speak too much about Talent Hub, but more on skills. But it's going to be a great opportunity of all of our shared efforts across of HR, from the skills being at the core to the learning development opportunities to just the visibility, which will create that employee career ownership and just knowing what skills are critical across the enterprise and how that they can have that linkage to learning and really upskill to be competitive in the future. This will just really be a transparency that's new for us, and will be a great tool for employees to utilize and really shape their career out.
Ravin, how does what Delta have done fit in with your, because Delta is kind of where the rubber meets the road for the ideas we've been talking about?
Yeah, Stuart, I really love what Britt and her team have done, because what she's described is where many organizations start, right? How do we make our jobs better? How do we make our jobs better markers of the way talent can be developed and deployed? How do we ensure that our jobs send better signals to people as it relates to what skills are demanded, where their next move might be? Everything that Britt's described with the talent hub of having skills then really be the currency that knits together multiple aspects of the human experience of work, whether it's the jobs they sit in, whether it's where they might move to next, whether it's the skills they acquire, whether it's, the ultimately potentially how the changes in compensation, etc. All of that, an opportunity to knit it together with skills as the currency for work. And I'll go back to something Peter said. I think we might have lost him there, but many of the organizations we work with really start with, let's make our job architectures more skills powered. That often is the starting point, because you've got an infrastructure in place and you're exponentially increasing its effectiveness. That then starts to bleed into perhaps, Britt, without knowing all of the details of the Talent Hub, but where we see organizations using technology, whether it's the marketplace that is in SAP versus, Float or Eightfold or whatever the platform might be, organizations shifting to then say, based off the good work that we've done to update our job architecture with skills, let's create flexibility so people have an opportunity to express their skills in different domains. They're still in a job, but the signaling we give them and the opportunities we give them to take their skills, maybe it's programming skills in IT, and take on a project in HR, or someone who's sitting in finance and helping IT build a new financial planning module, and being able to deploy those skills more flexibly across the organization. And Stuart, this goes back to your question about agility versus resilience, right? Because I'm now resourcing work in an ever more agile way, leveraging the soft, quote unquote, soft skills, right? The experience, the critical thinking, the knowledge of how to get stuff done in the Delta environment, the knowledge of Delta systems. And I'm leveraging that because I might be, again, that person in finance who's helping IT build a new financial planning module. And so I'm deploying my technical skills, leveraging all of my transferable skills to ensure a much speedier, more impactful outcome. And I think that's where you start to see the pivot in the organizational model from these fixed roles, which are much more effective with skills, to more flexible construct, to ultimately, what I think of as being agile on steroids, a flow type model where, it's more of a marketplace where skills are continuously flowing to work. But again, that journey takes a long time, but the foundations that Delta has put in place absolutely set them up for success. And I think they've just done it incredibly well with engaging all of the stakeholders. And as you can appreciate, Stuart, it's no mean feat when you're talking about 100,000 people, including, populations that are, not your traditional merit, not your traditional quote unquote white collar populations, right? When you've got a diversity of talent, I think it's just been done masterfully.
I would take that compliment, Britt. So it seems to me it's the openness, the transparency, and that fluidity you're talking about, Ravin, is really the attraction. Is that right, Britt?
Yes, it will allow employees to see what skills are necessary or give them that structure to have a baseline of how they can upskill to be competitive in the future. Today, if you wanted to move around Delta, it can be pretty intimidating because it's such a large company. There's so many various areas you could take your career. And so the skills will really allow employees to see where else their current skills or previous skills that they used at other jobs but aren't currently exercising could be successful and tap into future job opportunities.
A very precise question. Has Delta captured any significant metrics on the ROI for the movement to the skills-powered organization? Or is it might be too early in the process?
No, it's okay. I mean, for our team, we really measured success for us personally as a skills validation team for completion of skills validation and then leader sign off of those skills. Long term, the success of the project will be giving our people at Delta the right tools to find and develop the best talent, which will be provided through Talent Hub. So more to come on the KPIs of that system. But for us, it was really just getting all of the validation process done across Delta, across all of our subfamilies and job families, and then getting that leader buy-in and sign-off was really a great checking point for us.
What surprised you along the way, Britt? I mean, you're experienced in this field. You worked with Mercer earlier in your career. What surprised you on the process?
Like I said earlier, just probably the receptiveness of the company and the buy-in and excitement. This is something that is new and was new for us at Delta. And it was kind of taking a leap into the unknown and then working with the subject matter experts, getting to hear from them, their genuine excitement and seeing the full potential of the future rollout of this. And then having that leader buy-in, it's just reaffirming all of the hard work that skills validating is and the future connection points to our fellow HR partners and how this is going to really change and provide potential connection points for us as key stakeholders and just collaborators is really has been an opportunity and just a happy ending for all of this hard work that we have done, and really just looking forward to employees getting to use it and take it and run with it, as ultimately this is a voluntary tool. And so it's really based on employees wanting to know more about their career, wanting to upskill, do that personal development, and really take ownership of their career.
Danny Wareham has got an interesting point, which I think you alluded to, Britt. He says the discussion has focused on employees with an inference towards the operational areas. Are these skill-based models and suggestions applicable to and utilized by the C-suite? If so, how has adoption been at Delta? I think, Britt, you were talking about buy-in from the leadership.
Yeah, great question. So for our initial skills validation, we were really prioritizing IC, so individual contributors, up to GM or general manager. This isn't really targeting executive, so director plus at this time, but it is still relevant as a majority of those individuals manage people who are below them. So this will help be targeted conversation points to work with their employees to work towards any gap areas of skills. But at this time, it was really just targeting that IC to GM population. So we made sure that the skills that were included on each subfamily were relevant and truly essential for each subfamily and not too position specific or too niche.
Thank you. Eldon says, it's interesting how even though Delta has a workforce of 100,000, three key things still stand out in their success: leadership buy-in, employee engagement, listening across the organization. Thank you, Eldon. You're doing my work for me. But does that ring true, Britt? Those three elements do seem key.
Yes. I mean, to even get started just in skills foundation in general is just making sure that you have the right business case for it, for why you want to become a skills powered organization. And then, like he said, that leader support and the org readiness is really key to making this a successful initiative.
And Deepika says, how did you incorporate future skills in your skills framework? Which is
great question.
It's quite a nice question. Thank you, Deepika. Good one.
Yeah. So first of all, to even get the skills list, the most important thing is to make sure you have the right skills mapped to the right subfamily. So to accomplish that, we partnered with around 500 subject matter experts across Delta to just make sure our initial taxonomy was relevant and accurately represented the needs of each subfamily. So for an evergreen strategy, it is important to establish ones to update the skills over time. So we will be refreshing the skills taxonomy and responding to the business needs so that as Delta grows and adapts, so will the corresponding subfamily skills and lists. And this will just help us create a more comprehensive and accurate list that is consistently used by all and plays into the long-term plan of this. And so I don't want to speak for Mercer, but they refresh the skills library on a quarterly basis. So we will be utilizing that and then skills from the business to make sure that our skills lists are updated and reflective of what it truly means to be in a said subfamily.
Which leads seamlessly to the next question from Ralph, which is another good question. How many skills does Delta manage in their skills library ontology, and how do they support employees to get an overview?
Great question. So for each subfamily, we had around 5 to 10 skills for each. So it varied depending on the subfamily, but in total, we have probably around 130 subfamilies in total. And so we have a composite of potentially 550 to 700 skills, depending on the certain area and just our total skills taxonomy, in addition to both the scale and merit. We did a different approach for scale, just in the instance of there are more high volume known jobs. So we were able to go a little bit deeper, write more of those position specific skills. Meanwhile, on the merit side, we kept it to that 5 to 10 skills as there are various positions, and we focus more on the subfamily essential skills on that side of the house.
Nick Lean's come back with another question. Besides mobility, development, etc., what are the other business benefits objectives? I think you've kind of covered this.
Sure.
Okay,
No.
good to reiterate.
Yeah, I would say it really impacted two other key areas. One is going to be the hiring manager experience. So it will be enhancing the hiring manager experience by creating consistency through the subfamily skills, which will ultimately attract more qualified candidates through clearly identified skills. So previously, if you are hiring on your team, you would work with talent acquisition and create said list of skills. But with this skills foundation, each subfamily will have a baseline of skills to start from. So that will help us on the consistency end and just making sure all of our open job recs have that baseline of skills. And then the second one, as I mentioned before, is just the career ownership, the transparency to skills across Delta, which will allow employees to see what skills are required and how they can upskill and strengthen the core accordingly through our learning and development opportunities.
Okay, Ravin?
Sorry. So I just want to jump in just on that question about the business benefits, because it's come up a couple of times. We typically are also seeing, once you've got these processes in place, like Delta, 5 really significant benefits. One is a fairly immediate one around just the reduced time to fill. So the time to be able to fill open roles, open requisitions. Every CHRO I've ever talked to in my 30 plus year career has said, all our people tell us it's easier to find a job outside the company than within the company. And what Britt has just described squarely addresses that problem. So reduced time to fill. Second is much greater visibility into the talent we have today and all of those skills that we have in the organization. And I am always surprised by how shocked people are. It's like, even on their direct teams, boy, I didn't know that she had those skills or he had those skills. And that's the sort of stuff that gets unearthed when you start moving towards skills as the currency. The third is a much better lens, if you will, for understanding the shift in demand for work. So what work is emerging, what work is declining? And Britt sort of alluded to that when she talked about the process of getting these 100 experts to provide input, because you're making it really crisp and clear about, how is the work changing and what are the skills required, as opposed to telling me I need to hire a data scientist, because that's the old blunt instrument approach, which unfortunately we no longer have the luxury for in many instances. So get really precise about how's the work changing and what does that mean for the skills required. The fourth big benefit, as you think about this transition from fixed to flex to flow roles of work, is that agility often giving rise to much higher levels of labor productivity in organizations. We have some great examples of the pretty dramatic increases in productivity. And then the last big benefit, Stuart, is just speed and agility, to come full circle to where we started from. The speed and agility with which we can redeploy skills across the organization as the demand changes is another significant benefit that companies are starting to realize.
A few more questions coming in. Andrew says, how are you measuring the skills proficiency on an employee level and validating it? That one's for you, Britt. I suppose
Great
it's one
question.
thing talking about skills and people may profess to having them, but how do you measure that?
So we are utilizing Mercer's proficiency scale. So it's a scale of 1 to 5 with beginner all the way up to expert. And so as part of our validation process with the subject matter experts, we had them apply proficiencies once we aligned on a final list of skills for their respective subfamily. And so we have cascaded those proficiencies to all applicable grade levels. So whether you are a grade 5 all the way up to a GM, like obviously depending on a certain skill, there's going to be a range of what proficiency level is expected at that hiring. So we do have proficiencies and we have them for all of our skills. And this will also be visible for employees in the talent hub that's rolling out next year, so that they can see where they measure up to a baseline and improve over time. But for our initial rollout, it is not going to be tied to performance management, as this is just going to be visibility into the skills for the first time. But that's definitely an opportunity in the future to have it be more of a measured tool.
Thanks, Britt. And thank you for some really excellent questions here. And Danny's got a good point, which I think is for Ravin. Data show that tenure and loyalty and employee satisfaction are higher when we are stretched in our roles with an opportunity for autonomy and development. This implies that we might benefit from hiring individuals that fit most, but not all skills requirements. So I think he's suggesting there's got to be a degree of flexibility in our interpretation. So what are your thoughts?
Completely agree, Stuart, because I think so much, and I think that's the other benefit of moving to having this whole person view, if you will, right? All of the things, all of the skills that Britt has, not just her technical skills, because I think so much of traditional hiring has been, I need a data scientist, so she has to do Python or Julia AI, and we limit that person to the box we're trying to fill today, as opposed to understanding what are the future requirements of the organization and hiring someone who can be relevant 3 to 5 years from now. Because the technical stuff is the stuff that's really easy to teach. And I think that's where the work that Tonnage did, Stuart, was really compelling, because in that headline of we can save $50,000 was an incredibly nuanced narrative of, well, the folks we've brought on board have the transferable skills of working in our culture. They have the skills of working in our systems. They've got the networks, etc. And it'll only take us 3 months to teach them some of these new financial skills, versus we could go out and hire someone who's doing that work at a competitor today, and it might take him or her 2 years to understand how to work in our culture, in our operating model, to get things done with the same level of productivity. And I think that's the calculus that becomes visible when you've got these building blocks of skills.
Tanuj has put the ideas to work at Standard Chartered. Can you just reiterate the $50,000 thing, Ravin? Because I think it's such a killer statistic. It's worth making it clear.
Absolutely, yeah. So what she's shown her board, and this is in the book as well, is that as Standard Chartered Bank transitions its operating model towards financing the transition to net zero for their customers, as we've seen with many financial services organizations, they can save £50,000 per employee by transitioning people from the sunset parts of the organization, the sunset roles, the parts of the business that are changing, where the demand is falling off because of AI and self-service, or the bank's getting out of particular businesses, towards these growth areas, as opposed to doing what companies have always done, which is every 7 or 8 years, I'm going to fire a bunch of people over there with legacy skills and go and hire a bunch of people with these new skills that I need. And if you think of all of the consequences of those choices, right, the impact on the culture, the impact on the organization's knowledge, and being able to sort of manage the flow of knowledge, that's really what's captured in that £50,000 headline.
Yeah, it's an amazing statistic. Raju has got a comment which I think is probably important. Does head of learning or chief learning officer need to have a strong technical background together with business and soft skills? Companies in the size of 50 to 2,000 don't have the required leadership to take on such tasks. I suppose the question there Raju's getting at is who takes the lead? If you're a smaller organization, who takes lead? But then again, in Britt's situation at Delta, who are the people taking the lead in this? Britt, perhaps you go first, and then Ravin can contribute.
So yeah, sure, I'll start. So for us at Delta Airlines, we on the talent management team became the skills team, and we did the skills validation process, which we took the job architecture from compensation, worked with Mercer, and with these skills, we have shared them with our HR partners, such as learning and development, who then created content based on those subfamily skills. And then also our talent acquisition partners, so that they have it in alliance with their hiring platforms, and so that they are able to use the skills for hiring talent. And so making sure all of those key stakeholders are in a part of this and a part of the process the whole way will ensure ultimate success, as it does impact various work streams, and making sure that they are along the ride from the beginning is really crucial for ultimate success.
Ravin?
Yeah, Stuart, I think in smaller organizations, my experience has been that it often can be a lot easier, right? Because Britt has to navigate a whole host of stakeholders and legacy and infrastructure. What we've seen, Peter and I, in our work with smaller organizations, often it's chief talent officer, head of HR, who sort of leads this. They start off with a series of pilots to pick some job families that are moving really quickly because of changing demand, et cetera, to say, look, we need better visibility into the demands of the changing demand for skills. So let's ensure that we're starting with a subset of the organization where the velocity of change is greater. Let's then take that lesson learned and ensure that our business leaders are tracking with us. And they start with, taxonomies like Mercer's, like the World Economic Forums, et cetera, as a way of just getting started. But what we also find in smaller organizations, that mobility of talent often is much greater than very large organizations, right? Because people can look across. I can look across to you, Stuart, and know the work you're doing versus Britt, who's sitting on the other side of the hall from me. And there tends to be a model of, cross-resourcing and cross-skilling in smaller organizations, that just because of scale and size, right, where you don't have the degree of specialization and focus that a larger organization would have. So I actually think it's a lot easier to get going and to make things happen in small organizations because of just the lack of scale and complexity.
Nice to see you again, Peter. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Let's fire a question in your direction. This is from a LinkedIn user. On one side, we're looking to have an agile workforce with upskilling via company or self-driven. And on the other side, we're expecting employees to develop skills based on the skills proficiency matrix? How do we strike a balance?
Great question. I mean, I think that, and by the way, I've missed, as you know, I've had a lot of technical issues here, so I've missed really the content that the others were sharing here. But I mean, from our perspective, having a proficiency framework in place is a really important part of actually unlocking the benefits of a skills taxonomy, right? So, creating that taxonomy in the first place is your foundation layer, and that links ideally to your job architecture, which gives you a sense ideally of the skills that are expected for a given job. But of course, it doesn't tell you the level of expertise that an individual has versus those skills, right? So that's where the proficiency framework comes in, and typically some form of measurement of the employee's level of proficiency against that framework for those skills, whether it's employee self-reported and manager validated, or 360 type assessment, or formal assessment tests. Yeah, I would definitely say having a proficiency framework in place is an important part of really delivering against the value proposition of skills powered approaches and skills taxonomies.
And Peter, how do you think these things are going to play out if we look 1 year, 3 year, 5 years ahead? How do you think is the organizational world going to embrace these ideas to what extent are they going to do so, do you think? Because there needs to be, some movement between organizations, and the old legacy job market or way of looking at the world will carry on to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah, completely. I don't think that, I wouldn't say for a minute that sort of traditional job-based approaches, or even necessarily, competencies are going away. I think this is sort of like general drift, towards skills, but I think skills are being overlaid on top of traditional approaches, potentially, and interwoven with them, right? So potentially, a few years down the line, as the technology continues to improve, as the data continues to improve, and also as because when you transition to becoming a skills-powered organization, this takes time and it requires a cultural shift. So as organizations' cultures develop and mature, I think we're going to see a general progression in that direction, where skills-powered approaches become an increasingly proportionally representative part of the overall approach. So skills are here to stay, and they're going to get bigger over time. But I don't see anybody really pivoting away from jobs and ditching skills in the short term.
And Barb Archer's got a very brief question. How would you explain the difference between a competency and a skill?
Yeah, again, a great question. And I'll start by saying that there's really no even universally accepted definition of, what we mean by competency or skill. But the way that we look at it, or the way that I look at it, is that a competency is like a much bigger, broader basket than a skill. Skills are much more granular, and they go down to a level of specificity that competencies historically wouldn't match. Some people feel that competencies, fall more on the on a particular side of the skill type house. But I feel personally it's about, level of granularity and specificity.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Peter. I see. Well, I was interested when you were laying out the 3 capabilities about the understanding demand signals. It always seems to me it's something organizations are particularly bad at. You can see that development, closing the skills gap. There's a lot of talk about that, and a lot of money goes into it, and the deployment of skills, which is what we've been talking about largely. But the understanding demand signals seems a real difficult area for companies to understand.
Yeah, Stuart, of the 3 areas that we looked at and defined, it was that first piece of that work design, right? Understanding the demand, understanding the supply, and then orchestrating the optimal combination of solutions to get the work done. it was the demand signals that frankly were really bad at getting timely and accurate signals. Because very often, when HR gets a request for, I need someone with Julia AI skills. Well, it's because, the demand for Python has waned so much. And we're now seeing our competitors shift, and managers react often after the fact. And that's one of the benefits, I think, if you've got a skills-based approach and getting really crisp and clear about, how is the work changing and what skills are required to do that changing work. It forces a conversation, as Britt has done with her experts, as she talked about the 100 experts, forcing that conversation and ensuring it's a continuous conversation, right? Because the work is going to keep changing. There are going to be new ways of getting things done, new technologies, etc., which are going to shift premiums around. Having a methodology to consistently get a robust articulation of when that changes and translating that to skills quickly, I think is incredibly important. But it's also why, and this is where Peter and I might disagree a little, because I actually see organizations starting on the skills journey, going back to when I was working with Unilever in 2017, where they introduced the skills marketplace and today have 70,000 people on that marketplace. So companies have started on this journey for a while. And I think what we see is when they've got robust foundations like Delta Airlines, like Unilever, the journey accelerates quite exponentially, Stuart. And what you get as you move, from that fixed to flex to flow models is you get much earlier demand signals, and you get much more precise demand signals that are, you can translate into specific skills requirements rather than the age-old thing of, I need a Python developer and I need to go get this person because something has changed. And I think that's something that organizations are just not very good at. And unfortunately, that quote unquote not being very good at thing gets exposed in an environment where the velocity of change is just so much greater.
We're nearly out of time. Britt, final word from you. Where are you on your journey? You're an airline after all. Are you in the executive lounge or taxiing on the runway? where do you feel you are?
Yeah, so we have obviously completed our validation process, so we are gearing up for the Talent Hub launch. But the words of advice for those who are looking to embark on this journey is, once you have job architecture, just a few reminders is the timing, taking the time to get it right, ensuring the right people are involved. So whether that's subject matter experts, leaders, the business, having that connection to technology, the impact to your HR partners, such as talent acquisition, comp, L&D, but ultimately getting that leader buy-in across the business will help you be successful in the end. Brilliant
bit, Britt. Thank you for sharing your story. That was really great practical stuff. Peter, you get the final word. You feel optimistic?
Do I feel optimistic? Yeah, I feel super optimistic. I mean, like I say, that I think for companies who are yet to get started or are quite early on in their journey, of which there are, quite a few out there. If that feels like you, don't worry, because a lot of companies are in the same place. But I'd also say don't delay too long, as there's also, to Ravin's point, plenty of companies out there that have been on the journey for a little while and are making great strides forward to their advantage.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ravin, Peter and Britt. That was a great discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Some really great questions from around the world. Really appreciated them. So please join us for the next webinar in this series. That will be at the same time on September the 18th. And we'll feature Lauren Mason and Jessica Kennedy from Mercer, along with Jennifer Acostas from Kenview, talking about how to make job architectures future fit. And finally, a reminder that Ravin's book with Tanuj Kapila-Sharami, The Skills Powered Organization, can be ordered now. Thank you, everyone.